30-minute reviews, Beware of Spoilers, and Exploring Hyperspace Lanes are all available ad-free. But if you want to support the show, you can go to bewareofspoilers.com and click the support button that's available on the Spotify website. Thank you. Good morning and welcome to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam. Quick programming note, I was going to do Boy Kills World today. I'm going to move whatever movie I end up doing to tomorrow because today I have to get something done on my car. And yeah, I need to, there's a nail in my tire and so I need to get that fixed. Considering the nail's been there for like a week, and I just noticed it yesterday, we should be good. Because I wouldn't have known that it was there for a week. If it weren't for the fact that some guy at work was like, oh, hey, like I was like, oh, I saw a nail in my tire. And he's like, oh, yeah, it's been there all week. You didn't notice? And I was like, you saw it? You didn't say anything? Like, feels like something important you should tell me if you see. But regardless, here we are. The Bad Batch. We didn't do this last week because I had no desire to watch the show last week, I'm completely honest. And here we are. And there are notable, like, visual parallels I'm noticing between this and Andor. And, like, the way they block the shots of, like, Omega talking to talking to the other kids about how they're gonna break out of Tantus and out of the cloning facility. It's like, all right, cool, like, and it's shot the way they shoot what's his name, Andy Serkis in that movie, in that show, and I appreciated that. That said, there is, like, I appreciated these episodes more, because I feel like this should have just been the show. Because we've talked about this before, this idea that, like, okay, so there is a point A and a point B on this, and we need to get, the goal of the show is to get from point A to point B with some efficiency and all of that. Considering the season started with Omega in captivity on Tantus, and it's about the team breaking her out is the goal. And they can't find her, but she escapes on her own with the help of Crosshair. My issue with this is, why didn't we just do this from the beginning and then and I think that the answer is obvious. I think that, when we get next week's episode, the team is dead. Like, I think that the most likely outcome is the team is dead and Omega escapes. Because I don't think they kill Omega, but I think Omega escapes and the team dies. And for that reason, I think that we're stuck in the situation where it's like, look, we couldn't start the season like that for obvious reasons. If you start the season like that, you're kind of just stuck dealing with, the aftermath of that. And, it just feels like a very roundabout way to get back to where we were at the beginning of this. Because we started this season in this exact place. She's going to escape. They're coming to rescue her. Like, it's just this long, circuitous route to get to what we were going to do from the beginning. And to that end, I don't think that the journey that we went on to get there was that good or interesting. Like, I don't think that the trek that this roundabout way this show does this is intriguing enough to where I'm like, all right, this was worth the journey to see what she was doing, to see what was going on with this team. I don't feel that way after watching this, which is a shame. Because I don't want to feel like I am, under some, watching the show and just like, okay, well, after all of this, we're going right back to where we were in the beginning. beginning. It's just bizarre. And look, I think that this show had its high points as a show, and we'll get into this in 2 weeks when we do a wrap up of the Bad Batch, because it ends in 2 weeks. But this show definitely had its highs and its lows, and the highs, when they hit, were very high, and they worked very well. The issue was, anytime the show hit the lows, that's kind of where we ended up in the situation where it's like, you know, why are we doing this? Why are we stuck doing, you know, this nonsense? Where it's just like, we didn't need to, what's it called? We didn't need to sit here and watch this needless part of the journey. And I think that this season is the majority of that, where it's like, what was the rationale for bringing in, what's her name? For bringing in, I almost said Avar Chris, that's not the person, Asajj Ventress. What was the reason for that? Was that really a necessary excursion? Like, at the end of the day, not really. Because at the end of the day, what information the clones were trying to get ended up being completely irrelevant. It didn't matter to the clones what the M-count targets were. And we, the audience, already know that. We know what Project Necromancer is. And if it's not explicitly laid out to us, we can probably suss it out through context clues. Because we know what happens in Episode 9. And I said this a few weeks ago when we were talking about, you know, when we talked about how they're honing on the M-count stuff. It's like, they're playing it as this mystery, but I think if someone is sitting down to watch an animated Star Wars TV show, especially this one that's not more, I don't want to say more mature because that comes off like I'm an asshole, but like one that's definitely designed, I would say it's not Clone Wars or early Rebels where it was designed for younger audiences, or Resistance, which is or High Republic Adventures. This is, you know, a darker war story. And when I say Clone Wars, I mean early Clone Wars, not you know, all Clone Wars. And when I watch this, the assumption should be that someone who has seen this show has seen at least the 9 movies. And I think with this, it's probably a safe assumption that I would say 85% of people who are watching this show have watched the Clone Wars. I feel like that's a safe bet that you could go into this as a writer, assuming, without worrying about like, oh, are we going to confuse people by introducing this? It's like, well, probably not. Probably not. Most people who watch this show will probably understand everything they need to going into it. So to spend the unholy amount of time they did on this M-count mystery, just to get back to the point to where they were at the beginning, which, like, is completely unnecessary. It just kind of feels like I wasted 15 weeks watching this show. Because no matter what they do, this could have been wrapped up in a movie and had all of that extra stuff in the middle just kind of cut. Because we didn't really need too much of that. Like, yeah, the Crosshair stuff was fun. I mean, and interesting. Like, all the stuff with him and his redemption arc was kind of interesting. But, what, like, was it worth the rest of the time that was spent on just, I don't want to say nonsense, it's like, I don't have a problem with filler episodes, because that would have been better. If it was like, okay, we are going to, like, we have Omega back, we are going back on our mission, we are here to try and disrupt the Empire anywhere we can, that's what we're doing. Like, that would have been fine. I would have been fine with that. And then we get back to the end of, like, okay, we need to get to we need to get to Tantus to stop that. We'll gather what we can to get the Tantus. I would have been okay with that. I would have been totally okay with that, because that would have worked for me. Because that gives you something to do without this sense of, like, we could have done this from the beginning. And there's really very little stopping us from the beginning, besides, you know, nonsense plot armor. Because that's really all it is at the end of the day that keeps them from going to Tantus out of the gate. It's the idea that, like, oh, well, we couldn't track her, obviously. That would be too easy. It's like, well, it's just insane to me that this season ended up the way it did. I think this is probably this is probably my least favorite season of one of the Star Wars shows. Maybe the end will wrap it up in a way that makes me feel like, alright, this was worth it. But, like, I don't know if anyone remembers, but last year on Exploring Hyperspace Lanes, when we talked about the news out of Star Wars Celebration, and they announced they were doing one more season of The Bad Batch, I was like, fuck yeah, let's go. The Bad Batch is great. I love this show. It's such a great little look at what it takes to you know, we're getting into what we're going to do in 2 weeks anyway, or I think it's 2 weeks. I think next week's the last episode. But yeah, I guess I feel like they completely dropped the ball this season, and I feel like these last 2 episodes are like, these are cool. It would have been cooler if we did this, you know, 2 months ago. Like when this show started, not now that we're sitting here and we're like, oh, well, what? Oh, okay, now we're getting to Tantus. It's like, and again, with the broader context of what's going on in the world of Star Wars with this cloning program that obviously doesn't end up failing because the Emperor does get cloned, albeit it does take like 40 years to do so. We know that this plan for the Emperor does not fail. So, like, they're going to go to Tantus, they're going to disrupt Tantus, okay, but, you know, they're going to relocate to Exegol. Is that going to be the big thing at the end of this? It's like, alright, well, that got fucked up, but we're going to Exegol now, so it's all good. Like, is that where this show is going? If that's where this show is going, like, was this season worth the effort? And again, we're getting into this question of, like, how much of Star Wars was properly handled, you know, with the sequel trilogy, because, again, this is another show that is starting to, you know, that's doing the legwork to rebuild the canon after, you know, a few years of it was built up and then was retconned by Rise of Skywalker. The issue that I have with, the other issue I have is, how do you do an Heir in the Empire movie? Because leaving Tantus open and running is obviously the best way to do that, because that gives you a place to do that. Also, Tantus featured prominently in the Heir in the Empire book. Like, well, the whole trilogy, this is the textbook way to handle that story. Because that gives you, okay, we have a place where they can go, we have a place where we're like 20 years before that, we can fit this in snugly with the other canon we have, like Shadow of the Sith, which is that more recent book with Luke and Lando, about Luke hunting down the assassin, or Chi the assassin, whatever the fuck his name was, that they pull the dagger off of in Rise of Skywalker. It is the quintessential way to handle this problem. Because this gives you a way for them to be like, alright, we have defeated the Empire. The Empire was trying to clone the Emperor, and was trying to use a cloning program for evil. We handled it. It is done. We do not have to deal with this anymore. Let's all go home, party, and do a lot of coke. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, why would you go through this if you're not going to do that? Because that at least sets you up somewhere where you're like, alright, I get where we're going, and I see what, I see the vision of what the plan is. Without having something like that concretely set up, I don't see a good reason why they handled, like if they're going to destroy Tantus, or do they end the Bad Batch on kind of a dour note, the failed mission that leads to their death, which I've said from the beginning is fine if they do that. I don't know if the general public will agree with me on that. But we'll wrap up there for today. And until our next episode, have a great rest of your week.